Good afternoon and welcome back to Resolutions for Recovery. This show is dedicated to the education, empowerment, and all forms of multiple pathways to recovery for both the family and for the person that's struggling with substance use. So excited to be back now because we've really been building Thomas's Hope all summer, and we're going to have some really exciting news coming forward each week on the programs that we are building. And I just want everybody to stay tuned because it's going to happen, it's happening, and we're really excited about it. So this afternoon we're going to meet with Karen Reass, my special guest, and we're going to talk about relapse prevention education that we're actually going to be starting a week from tomorrow, November 8th, at Good Samaritan Hospital. If you're interested, you can, I'll give my cell phone number. It's 631-219-5285. Reach out to me. This is for family members and for people in early recovery. We want to make it open. You know, relapse does not have to be part of substance use, but oftentimes it is a part. And what does that look like for all sides of the equation? Thank you so much for joining me today, Karen. So happy to have you on board and working certainly with us and Thomas's Hope. We're going to do some great work. That's what I do now.
Yes.
So when I guess we should start. Relapse prevention, right, would be for a relapse. So I can describe maybe, when someone's in early recovery, like any other disease, whether it be heart disease or diabetes, or there's a certain amount of time to really gain information about yourself and how you mitigate your disease.
Right.
So if a diabetic has high sugar, we don't consider that a failure, but a relapse in cancer means that the disease came back for a moment and needs more treatment. So would that be the same description for substance use?
Sure. There's going to be a treatment protocol, which if the addicted individual follows, they have a great chance of reducing their risk of relapse if they follow the treatment protocol. So what I like to do is describe the steps that they need to take to have the best outcome and avoid relapse. So I like to really focus on the recovery process, on that treatment protocol, and there are stages.
There's stages, but we're also talking about the old adage, if you work your program will work.
Correct.
So, and that goes for the family piece also.
Yes.
Everyone needs to be walking towards a similar goal.
Right. Well, it's about change.
Yes, so it's always about change. But I love that we're going to empower and educate people to have a better chance for success.
Absolutely.
As with every disease, what you eat, how you eat, there's all other ancillary services.
Yes, approach.
That whole piece. So let's start a little bit with what early recovery may look like for an individual.
Sure. Well, initially there's going to be a crisis that occurs in someone's life which will get them to move from active use to abstinence. Obviously addiction, causes problems for the individual, but what helps them to wake up to recognize that maybe it's time for change? It's usually a crisis.
Yes.
And that crisis can be, a legal crisis, it can be a health crisis, it can be a family situation, they could lose custody of their children, or they could just have an emotional bottom where they wake up and realize something needs to change.
We are currently have, support recovery coaches in the ED department. So waking up from an overdose is often a crisis.
It is a crisis.
Yes.
If they recognize it as such, we certainly do.
Yes.
As family members or loved ones of the addicted individual. But for the addicted individual, it's going to be what personally for them is the wake-up moment. So once they have that moment, even if it's kind of forced on them because it's a legal intervention or whatever the intervention is, there's a treatment protocol that's instilled, and then where do they go from there? So that's when they get into early recovery. They go from active use to abstinence, and then we start to talk to them about what are the next steps you need to take. All right. And motivation is key, right? Yes. But it's very difficult to keep motivation high. And all of us know that because we've tried to cut down on sugar or stop eating this or that or lose weight.
Absolutely.
So motivation is good for a sprint, but not for the long haul. We need to have supports really built into that system to keep the motivation going, keep the education coming, keep the supports in place, and build in the family system and the peer support to keep them on track.
Yes, absolutely.
So there are steps in early recovery that it's basically a lot of education in early recovery.
A lot of education.
For the family and for the addicted individual.
And you know, everybody's in that honeymoon phase, I guess we could call it, right? Everybody's so happy because I'll use my own son, you know. There was Thomas, my son, and Thomas on substances.
Yes.
I don't miss Thomas on substances, not a little bit, because this was the antithesis of who his soul really was.
Correct.
So during that nice phase when everyone is happy and the family gets, from my perspective, that false sense of security almost. They're fine, they're good, you know, and it might be 7 to 10 days that everything's going well, and then you see old behavior return.
Oh, sure. Because
Yes. And that's what we want to protect against. Don't not expect that behavior to happen, but everyone needs to be prepared for that behavior to happen.
Correct. So if the treatment protocol usually will include a detox, a period of detox,
Yes.
and then stabilization, that may occur in an inpatient level of care.
Correct.
It could occur in an outpatient, but more often in an inpatient following a crisis. And you're right, the family will sometimes get a false sense of security and think that, well, an inpatient, they're going to be fixed, which is far from the truth.
That's very true.
Right, because we're detoxing, stabilizing an individual, but then the recovery really starts when they leave that safe environment and they're back in their home environment or wherever they left. And we have to look at that.
An unstructured environment, really.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
With all those cues and triggers for the relapse. So we have to build in a lot of support and structure for wherever it is they're going to. And that's why if they're going home to the family system, we want to involve that family.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. You know, and there's many places that they can go home to. You know, community residence, a sober living facility. You know, even sometimes, unfortunately, there are too many people that don't have a family per se. You know, and family comes in many different shapes and sizes.
Right.
But you may not be going back to a supportive environment right away.
Absolutely.
And we need to support that person. So I know for us at Thomas's Hope, we really concentrate on the family piece. So while the loved one is seeking their own path to recovery, we put the family on their own path to recovery. Because everyone needs a toolbox at the end of this.
Absolutely. And this, as it is for the addicted individual, that they have that moment where they wake up, hopefully, to recognize that something needs to change, that drugs are at the source of their current crisis, and they stop blaming other life situations. It's the same for the family.
Yes.
Because the family's in denial too, and often wouldn't recognize that it is substance abuse, that it is addiction that's at the heart of their child or their significant other's problem, rather than, again, blaming situations in the environment. So the family has to have their own moment of waking up and recognizing and accepting, which is hard. It's a process, that this is real, this is a lifelong issue. I have an addiction in my family.
Yes.
It's usually not just one person.
Correct.
So it's time to start being honest about that and start addressing, everyone needs to take accountability for their own
own place. You know, whatever their place is in the family, you need to take, you know, it's very easy in today's world to blame everything else. But, how does that saying goes? When you're pointing the finger, three point back at you, correct? Right. So we need to always recognize what, you know, listen, I may be the least of your problems, but there certainly is something that I could do better, right? For anyone in the world. I mean, we can take it a lot further than just where we are, right? You know, and teaching parents with recovery coaching, just your language, how you speak to them. You know, how can I help you with your recovery today? You've already said what you're willing to help them with. Right. And there's no power struggle then. So tell us more, though, about...
Yeah. Well, that's easier said than done.
I know.
Because those
It's a
dynamics, exactly,
Yes.
those dynamics are so deeply embedded in that family system. And we want to understand what's going on in that family system to help people be better, you know, and communicate more effectively, stop the blaming, the shaming, the yelling, the manipulating on both sides, on all sides. We know the addict did it, you know, when they were in their active addiction. We're giving them a roadmap to work on those, you know, they're getting treatment, right?
Yes.
So starting with inpatient, going to outpatient, they're going to get a lot of tools and they're going to get a roadmap to follow. It's really important for the family to also engage in the treatment with the individual, or in family therapy or family coaching, or, you know, whatever resources are available. 12-step meetings, of course, also super helpful in learning how to love and yet allow consequences. You know?
Yes. Yes.
And so there's a lot the family members need to learn.
And I'm going to, you know, last night we had an educational event at Thrive with Rob Kent, the general counsel for Oasis, came down, and families, I'm just going to say this out loud, are allowed, everyone needs to find their own people. That's how I like to put it. You may go to 10 go to 10 groups, and at the 11th group you find the people that you really connect with.
That's right.
And that's the important piece of it. Not what you want to hear, but the people that you can really sit down and have an honest conversation with.
Right. But that support is crucial, that you find people who understand what you're going through, because sometimes in family systems it has been a source of shame, or there's a stigma attached and secrets are kept, and, you know, that's not healthy, and we understand that. So we want to at least introduce the family members to other individuals who are in the exact same spot as they are, that are working towards coming out of that stigma and the shame, and owning the reality of their situation and getting the help that they need.
Exactly. Exactly. We're not going to play it today, but there's a YouTube video, and it's what a Parkinson's patient wouldn't hear that an addict hears. And it's really, you know, it shows a mom with Parkinson's and shaking, and the family going through this whole little skit. But, you know, Mom, it's Parkinson's or it's us. You would never say that to someone because of where her disease is bringing her, with shaking and not being able to do things, and it being a source of embarrassment or whatever it is. You would never say that to someone struggling with a disease. Substance use is a disease, and we all need to remember that.
Right. We certainly want to build in accountability. There's nothing wrong with holding people accountable for what they are capable of.
Absolutely.
You know, and that is taking those steps, because one of the things we see with addicts is they don't want to take the suggestions that are given to them. And family members too. They have the same resistance, which is why I like to challenge family members. You want to point your finger and tell your addict what to do, but you don't want to do it yourself. So, you know, that's an interesting dynamic, but we really want to encourage addicts to follow suggestions. And when they don't, they tend to fall.
Yes.
So, you know, so there's very basic suggestions we give. One is stay in professional counseling.
Yes.
You know, if you're leaving an inpatient level of care, go to an intensive outpatient level of care. And also go to community-based support, whether you want to go to SMART recovery if you don't like 12 steps. But 12 steps are obviously the most readily available.
Yes.
The steps are designed to cover all the aspects that the addict's going to face, the challenges they're going to face. That's what the steps are there for.
Period.
Absolutely. It's about living life more productively, life on life's terms. It's all there for them.
Yes. But, you know, so what being a coach, we have to meet people where they are, and they get to choose their pathway to recovery. And again, if 12 steps is not for you, SMART recovery, refuge recovery, being entrenched in a recovery center with other people that are, you know, it could be art therapy, music therapy, it could be
a religious, you know,
correct.
organization.
There's many pathways in today's world that, you know.
Right. I would just say I would explore with an individual if they've had multiple relapses, what's worked, what hasn't.
Correct.
Let's look at those periods of abstinence. What did you do? What was working? And what was that relapse about? Because they tend not to see relapse as a process, but rather an event. And I challenge them to look at the fact that if they're working a program of recovery, whatever that is, they need to be accountable for it. If they're working a program of recovery, then relapse was a process that brought them back.
Yes.
It wasn't an event. It doesn't just happen.
Right.
Not if you're connected with people in recovery who can talk to you, who can see what's going on. If you're staying open, you're sharing, again, that's the process of learning to start to share your feelings.
Yes.
Versus
Bury
pushing them down, medicating them.
I always like to say that if you stay in the light, when you start to go back to your dark place,
right, isolating,
solitude, isolation, avoidance.
Those are all warning signs.
Those
we would call them
big time warning signs.
Especially if you've grown into the light, into recovery, and you start slipping back. You have to recognize, hopefully you'll recognize the warning signs. That's part of the education I'll give to the addicted individuals. What do those warning signs look like? What are your personal ones? Because they really start with thoughts.
Yes.
And the thoughts affect how they feel, and their feelings affect their behaviors. So, one thing leads to another. And if they don't recognize those more subtle thoughts that they're having, those early warning signs, which is the dis-ease, then they miss it. Right. And if they miss it, they progress in that towards picking up a drink or a drug again, if they've had any. So I like to lay it out on a timeline, meaning recovery occurs in stages, it unfolds in stages, and the further we move through the recovery process, by the time you get to late recovery, you may be at about a year. That's how far away you are from picking up that drug. And it takes quite a bit of slipping backwards to pick up a drug again. And the more space you put between yourself and that drug of choice is the more possibility for intervention before you pick up again. So I worked with a mother this morning who, 5 years into her recovery, lost her father. It was devastating to her. She was just sharing that she was actually visiting with her son, who's got a week in recovery. And she talked about how that she came very close to relapsing when she lost her father. With 5 years, she had a support group, but she didn't reach out. She was just it really threw her for a loop. She didn't reach out to her support group. She started going into a relapse process. I explained that to her. I said, you were in relapse, but you didn't pick up because you had moved so far in the process of recovery that it couldn't be instantaneous. You're going to pick up a drug. You would have to go through several phases backwards. So, and she did go through several phases backwards and caught herself, recognized she needed a bereavement group, that she was isolating, she was avoiding, she wasn't reaching out, got herself into a bereavement group, and through that got herself back into her whatever support group she was using, and got herself turned back around. So that's, we're never just this far away from picking up a drink. That is a myth. I have 32 years. I'm not this close. You could put a drink down in front of me. It's not going to tempt me. It might have in my first few months. Right. So that's the thing. You change your lifestyle over time. It's a change in lifestyle.
Change in thoughts, behaviors, actions.
Exactly. And then you see a change in lifestyle because you're not hanging out with the same people.
Right.
You're not in the same environments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you don't allow the toxicity, the darkness, if you want to use
darkness.
that. Yeah, the darkness and the light. We have it within us. But which part are we going to
you always have the choice. Right? Do I reach out to somebody? Exactly. And sometimes you don't have to say anything. You just have to say, I don't know, you feel like having a cup of coffee, or could we go for a walk?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Nothing needs to be said all the time.
Just the connection sometimes.
Just the human connection. The human connection.
Yes, absolutely.
That doesn't come through text, right? Because you're still so alone in your own thoughts.
No. Texting.
Yeah.
The human the eye contact.
The eye contact.
Being seen. Being seen,
because families can certainly see relapse or triggering or slipping. Certainly probably before the person struggling.
Yes, they could.
But quite often, they don't react quite the way that maybe would help the situation.
Right, and that's why we want to train them how to react when they see it. So the first step...
We don't want to yell.
No. But if we can help the addicted individual to recognize their own warning signs, and there's a process in which they can actually write them out.
Okay.
So when they write them out, then I would challenge them to say, now, are you willing to share your warning signs? What other people will see? Because they start with internal, but they become externalized, those warning signs, meaning other people can see them.
Okay.
So now, if you're willing to share those warning signs with your family, with your sponsor if you have, your support group, whoever you care about, are you willing to do that? And they'll say yes, right? If they're doing the right thing, they're going to say yes because they don't want to relapse. So now we can talk to their family members, their support system. Now, when you see this, what's the best way to intervene? To turn them around. You can afford a few steps back if you're in a recovery process. You can afford to get stuck. You can afford to take a couple of steps back. It's part of the process.
It's part of the process.
We don't want you sliding all the way back to substance use, where life feels like it's become unmanageable again.
Mm-hmm. And there are big time consequences for that.
Huge.
Right. Health-wise, work-wise, in every aspect of your life-wise, quite honestly.
Right.
For everyone concerned.
So we want to train the individual to recognize their warning signs, and then we want to train the family, because families can relapse too.
Absolutely.
You know, and we call it enabling behavior, which it is. You know, we want to educate families about what enabling looks like so that they can empower recovery. We want to show families what codependency looks like, because when you're very close to the addicted individual, you can become codependent.
Meaning
and
what,
not
Karen?
See.
Well,
you lose a sense of self.
Okay.
You can really lose your sense of self in relationship to that individual.
So maybe a statement would be, well, if they're okay, then I'm okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You are tied directly.
Tied directly. Your well-being is tied directly to
their well-being.
Right.
So if they're in recovery, you're okay, and if they're not, you're off the grid.
But when you actually look at that dance that they're in with the addicted individual, it's very unhealthy, and they're reinforcing the negative behavior in each other. So, yes, so there's degrees of codependency.
Okay.
So in a family system, sometimes the siblings who may not be as close, they may not be codependent, but they're still feeling something from out here. You know, they may not be living home, but they're aware that their parents are really, you know, sucked into this system, that their parents are financially strapped because of the amount of money they're spending on, you know, the addicted, or they're, you know, the enabling.
They're angry,
and they're angry about it.
They're angry because of all of those things, and it becomes life around one person.
Right.
And why don't I matter anymore?
Right. So then you have family members blaming, you're not handling this right, you're not doing this right, why are you enabling? So we want to work with the whole system when possible to get everybody on the same page. Stop blaming, stop shaming. Everybody's done the best they can. Even when you're enabling, you're doing it out of desperation.
Desperation, love. You don't know what you don't know at that moment in time.
Right. So then we're going to start.
You know, it's very, it goes against everything you are as a parent.
Yes.
So, you know, when you've raised a baby, you do everything for that.
To protect them.
Yes. And then all of a sudden you are doing things that really don't feel comfortable.
Yes, because you want to take away their pain, and when they're young, you do what you can to rescue them and soothe them and take away their pain.
And fix.
And fix the problem.
I want to fix the problem so you don't have to go through it.
So a first step for a family member may be recognizing they're powerless over the behavior of their loved one. Right. Because they really are. Once their loved one becomes an adult, even if they're in adolescence sometimes, there's a powerlessness that we experience.
There is a power. You know, once that disease takes over.
Yeah.
You didn't start it. Right.
Right.
You didn't cause it.
Right. Not responsible for it at all.
You can't control it. That's probably the biggest understatement ever. Because if parents could control the outcome, there'd be an awful lot of kids still alive today.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Alive and well.
Yeah.
And they're not. We're facing greater and greater numbers of kids that are succumbing to addiction. So I think we do need to educate parents. It's not that there's nothing they can do, but it's learning what's best. You know, it's not that there's nothing they can do. They may be powerless over their loved one's behavior, but the addicted individual does crave love. They crave connection. They may not be consciously aware of it, but when the family gets healthier, because oftentimes they're coming from very broken, family systems. If we can help the family system to become healthier, they can be, there's something for them to come back to also. So, and it can become more attractive to them.
Yes.
You know, when the family members are actually modeling for them
behavior that is expected of them.
Yes, and that is healthier, that they want for themselves. I saw it this morning. As I said, the mother who has 10 years of recovery, who lost her father when she had 5 years, almost went off the rails, but didn't. She was in a relapse process, but turned it around. Her son, who's 22, for the first time was asking his mother questions like, why did you go to jail? Because in her addiction, she went to jail, and he had been taken away by his father, and he heard about it, and he didn't know. And this poor kid was so traumatized growing. Both of his parents are addicted. But he was living with the healthier of the two, I suppose, at the time. Anyway, mother went to jail. He never knew why. He never knew anything. And mom today sat down with him and looked him straight in the eye, and she said, I was addicted to crack, and I was stealing from your grandparents. And I was just like you've stolen, I was stealing from everybody.
Yeah.
And multiple, she was deep in her addiction, and she told her son clearly and truthfully. And this kid, it was important for him to have those pieces, of truth. No more hiding.
Because, in anyone's mind, when we're rejected, we'll pick this up.
Oh, okay.
We're going to pick this up in 1 minute. We'll be right back after this message.
One, two, three. Long before my dream of playing professional football became real, addiction impacted my family and nearly destroyed it. As a New Yorker, I can tell you that all our communities are being hurt by addiction. New York State is leading the fight in combating addiction, providing help and treatment regardless of your ability to pay. For more information, visit combataddiction.ny.gov. Growing up as a young kid when addiction was around was tough. It was, at the time, I felt like it was unfair. I had to grow up quick. At the age of 11, my father left the house after, a couple months after I found drug paraphernalia in their nightstand. And it was a tough reality to face as a young kid. And, there were good days and bad days, but there were a lot of bad ones. After my father left, we got kicked out of homes. There were people in and out of my house, and I didn't understand, why did this happen to me? Why did addiction why did my parents have to be addicted to drugs? Yeah, going through recovery was a long road. When I was a senior in high school, my mother went away to prison. I had to go through my college recruiting by myself. I had to go off to college. My friends' parents took me to college. And so it was tough going through those times. But when my mom decided that she wanted to change her life, she wanted to get help. My mom got sober in prison. She got out of prison and gave up drugs and regained her relationship with God. My mother works for the church now, and we have a great relationship. I tell her every time I talk to her how proud I am of her and what she's accomplished. She's a tough woman. She's been through a lot, but the things that she's done after prison have been amazing. I'm so proud of her. She got her associate's degree. We have a great relationship. She's a great grandmother to my nieces and nephews, to my children. She's always there for me when I need to talk to her, and we have a great relationship. For a while, it looked like, when you're in it, when you were in the addiction part of it, I never thought my mom would be the same. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You can change your life, you can get help, and you can have a better life and regain those relationships and have a positive effect on those people around you. I look at, when I go through tough times in my life, I ask myself, what would my mom do? Because my mom has been through, I always say my mom has been to hell and back, and she's doing great, and I'm thankful for it. And I'm proud of her. My father as well. You know, I didn't have the best relationship with my father. When he left the house when I was 11, he left us with no car. I didn't speak to him for 3 years, and that was probably the toughest time of my life. But we gained that relationship back. My father's been clean for 3 years. His health is doing better. He's trying to be a better grandfather, trying to be a better father. And, you know, I forgive him. And our relationship is, you know, we're back communicating, and I love it, you know. I tell him I'm proud of him as well, because it's a tough circumstance. You know, it's easy to look at someone who's in addiction and blame them, and blame them for the choices they make. But it's the drugs, it's the alcohol that have a hold of them. And it's not, they don't want to be in that position. You have to understand that. They don't want to be making these decisions. They don't want to put these people in jeopardy. They want to get help. But once they decide to get help and to do something about it, there's great things that can happen at the end. Yeah, recovery is possible. And it happens to a lot of people. You know, you'd be surprised at how many people are in recovery right now that went out and got help. People out there that want to help you if you're in recovery. You know, there are people all over who you have no idea went through, they've been affected by it. You know, whether it's a family member, a friend, themselves personally, if they went through addiction. There are a lot of people that are going through issues that you've been through. So don't be afraid to ask for help. There are a lot of resources out there that can help you and get you the right treatment and to get you back on the road to recovery.
Welcome back to Resolutions for Recovery. Karen and I are just talking about relapse prevention and really stages of early recovery. You know, what it looks like for both sides of the family, you know, for all concerned, I should say.
Yes.
And what's that going to look like? So please
share
your wisdom.
Okay.
Oh, great one.
You're sweet. So early recovery will hopefully progress into greater and later stages of recovery. And this is the developmental model. I want to say that I've taken a lot of this particular model from Terence Gorski, he was considered the grandfather of relapse prevention at one time. So it's kind of based on his model, but then of course over the years I've tweaked it a lot. But there are stages that unfold, and there are tasks to be completed in each stage. So when I'm working with an individual who is in recovery, is serious about recovery, wants recovery, I'm going to challenge them to see what tasks they're willing to complete. You know?
Okay.
So things like asking for help. We're still in early recovery. You know, A, you have to recognize you have a problem. B, you have to recognize that you can't solve that problem alone with addiction, and that you're not going to solve it in a vacuum. So then asking for help becomes a big step. And I find with some chronic relapsers that their pride and their shame get in the way.
Say embarrassment.
Embarrassment, yes.
Embarrassment.
They don't want to.
Here I go again.
Yes.
Here I go again.
Yes.
I'm a loser.
Yep.
But that's really, I call that the disease sitting on your shoulder.
It is.
And whispering to you.
Sure. And also, they haven't given themselves the opportunity to get to a place where they're stable enough in recovery where they can do the deeper work that will really further help them in their recovery to get to their healthier relationships, more, you know, satisfying connections, because that's what comes down the line. So we first have to get them through being able to ask for help. One of the reasons we like to send people to support groups is because it's practice. You know, walking through the door, it's a new social norm when you're not drugged and you're in a group with other people and you're going to share. You're going to talk maybe more honestly for the first time in your life. You're not putting on a mask anymore. You're not trying to impress. Now, not to say they don't, but this is the process is becoming more authentic. You know, becoming more vulnerable. becoming more real.
You know, and Rome wasn't built in a day.
That's right.
So,
absolutely.
You know, little steps
Yep.
equal big steps after a while.
And I can tell you again, as somebody with 32 years, I was in therapy for a very long time and really took time, you know, and I'm glad I took my time. There's no rushing. We don't want to rush through and think we're done, because we're never done. You know, it's a continuation
and that goes
of
for
growth.
every human being.
Right.
We should never be done with our personal development.
Exactly.
If you're not learning something new every day, you're not alive.
Right. Exactly.
You're stagnant.
And that's a great word, becoming alive, because becoming alive is the process, and becoming alive means feeling your feelings. And that means the sadness as well as the joy. Unfortunately, we don't get to choose.
They go hand in hand.
That's right.
You know, and if you practice yoga, you
Yin
get
and yang.
attached to the moment in time that you are.
Uh-huh.
Not your happiest moment, not your saddest moment, just be. But you know, in my son's journal from his last rehabilitation center, he wrote on the inside of his black and white book, "To live doesn't mean you're alive." And that said everything that I so understand that statement so much more.
Yes. So finding your aliveness. And it's a healing process that is also physical. You know, it's not just emotional. And we want to educate families as to that neurobiology of addiction as well, so the clients and the families understand that the brain needs time to heal.
Yes.
You know, you talked about Parkinson's earlier, which is too much dopamine. Well, they don't have enough dopamine addicts in early recovery, and it's going to take a while for those dopamine levels to come back.
And
so they're not going to feel great in early recovery.
And their brain has to find new pathways.
Right. And they do that through new behaviors and new experiences. So activities, you know, that were pleasurable before. We want to re-engage them in those pleasurable activities so they can start to appreciate those again. Spending time with family, playing with children, you know, having a good meal, whatever. So in early recovery, we're reconnecting them with all of those, educating them about what's important. In middle recovery, we're really looking at...
What do you consider middle recovery? Just
in terms of time?
Yeah.
Well, I would measure it more by them.
The growth?
Yes.
The personal growth?
And it could take 6 months, or it could take 3 months, or it could take a year.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the individual.
It's an individual recovery.
Yes.
Okay.
But it takes place when there's less external motivation or pressures, and the motivation is now more internalized.
Okay.
And the individual is seeking out the positives and the recovery program because they want to, because it's working. Because
they feel better.
They feel
and
better.
Life is changing.
Right.
And rewards are happening.
Exactly.
And, okay.
Yeah. So
that's a good way to look at it. So
it's a more
because
self-regulated.
People also want to know, well, is he done in 3 months? Is he done he's done when he's done?
Well, there is no done in my
opinion.
there
is no done, but
like you said, it's a lifelong
journey
of growth and development. And that's something to be happy about.
You know, and I guess the best way to picture it is, if at 25, when we all thought we were so all-knowing and all so smart, would you still want to have that same mindset today? 10, 20, 30 years later, would you want that same mindset? Hell no.
And with addicted individuals, you know, they've stunted their growth, and you know, with all those drugs and alcohol that they've been ingesting. So their brains haven't, you know, gone through all these developmental stages.
Correct.
Necessarily appropriately. So we're taking them back through.
Yes.
So it really is a maturing process. So when we talk about middle recovery, we're also talking about internalizing structure, becoming more responsible. You know, these are things they fight against.
Yes.
Partly wanting to be, you know, that wild child, or, you know, just not wanting to be a grown-up. And I say to them all the time, from my own personal experience, you can still have fun.
Absolutely.
You know, and you're going to learn, you're going to realize you can still be silly, you can have fun, you can play. In fact, that's a great sign when you're
healthy.
Fun,
yes.
In recovery.
You know, life is meant to be fun.
Right. Well, sure.
So I can,
in part.
You know what? I, by the grace of God, do not have a problem with substance use, but I certainly can be a stupid ass on more than one occasion and enjoy that and not be embarrassed by it and just have fun. Just have fun in the moment in time that you are.
Yeah. And we all want that. And so we're all striving, and that's the aliveness that we're all striving towards. So so again, they have to go through some pretty uncomfortable stages. You talked about there could be a pink cloud, you know, and there can be,
yes.
But it doesn't last. So they're going to go through some uncomfortability. Again, the goal is to have enough support around them so when they're feeling uncomfortable, when they're having a craving, when there's an environmental cue that makes them go, oh my God, they need to pick up that phone, and they should have, you know, a number of people that they can call. That's what we train them to do. They've got to get rid of the old, you know, and bring in the new.
Yes.
Those are some of the social changes they need to make that they find.
So recovery coaches, sponsors, counselors, therapists, and friends.
Sure, friends and family. Sure.
You know,
whoever they want.
Whoever's
you know,
their people.
Yes. But I mean, again, the meetings are designed that way. That's exactly what they're available for. They make themselves available to be there on a dime. This one doesn't pick up, call this one. You should have a list of phone numbers so that you can get through that difficult moment. And also plan and strategize appropriately for if something's coming up, an event where you feel you have to go. And you feel it's going to be a high-risk situation for you because alcohol may be there or drugs may be there. Then you make a sandwich out of it. You know, call somebody before, bring somebody with you, you know, limit your time.
Or don't go.
Or don't go, of course.
Or just say, you know, at this point in my life, this is not really going to be a great place for me to be.
And that's where family comes in too.
And that's where family comes in.
We want family to support those types of decisions and respect those types of decisions and not put pressure on an individual if they're not ready.
Because we're coming into, you know, the happiest time of the year, supposedly. But for most people, it's not happy times. You know, the holidays bring a great deal of stress, emotions, and the Norman Rockwell picture of what Christmas looks like on Christmas morning really doesn't exist for anyone. You know, so I know that families want to have people over, and you know, if you have someone in early recovery,
it can be very stressful for them.
It's extremely stressful for all concerned. And you know,
because of the family dynamics.
Yes.
If that family's not in recovery. And I tell families, you know, and recovering addicts that all families are dysfunctional. It's a matter of degree. I mean, let's be honest. So let's normalize this. There are always family dynamics, and some families have very unique dynamics. Some families have a great deal of historical trauma in their family systems and or addiction. And they may look great on the outside, but there's these deep underlying chords which the addicted individual going into that system can really regress. You know, when we're trying to build a support system around them, if the family's not healthy, that's, you know, it's really going to be a trigger for them. So we really have to work with both sides of the puzzle to understand where the boundaries need to be to keep them, you know, as you mentioned earlier, there may be options to going home if that's not a safe environment.
That's not a safe environment, then that's not where anyone needs to be.
Right. Yes.
Certainly someone at risk for dire consequences, and that's really, honestly, quite it. You know, and coming into the holidays, speaking with parents as I have in the past few years, if you can't remove alcohol from your home, because that could be a trigger, then maybe you need to look at why you need the alcohol to be out.
Precisely.
And if you can't explain to friends and family, we've decided to be non-alcoholic this year for personal reasons and for health reasons. And if other people can't share in that, then they can go and look at themselves. And if is the holidays about being with people that you love and sharing, you know, for me it's a day in a year. You know, yes, it's a beautiful time of the year. There's electricity almost in the air. You know, it's a different feeling that we all get. But if you can't be all on the same page,
well,
then
it speaks volumes about that family system if they can't feel that they can connect without a drug in their system.
Correct.
And I think, you know, people don't like to hear that.
Is still a drug.
I'm saying it.
Yep.
I'm saying it. A lot of families use it. And they don't think of it as a drug, of course. But it is. And, you know, if they're so uncomfortable not having alcohol, it speaks volumes, as you said. It means the family needs probably some work.
Yeah.
You know.
And then it becomes, you know, if the family decides, well, this is how we're doing the holiday, then that person in early, middle recovery has the option to say, I'm choosing to go
to a family system where, you know, with my friend from AA, let's say, they're
that's going to be more
sure conducive
for my help.
Absolutely.
And
those are
everyone
tough choices.
respecting that decision, right?
Well, hopefully.
So that would be a sign, I would say, of middle recovery, to have enough cognizant ability to say, this is not good for me. It doesn't feel right. I'm going to go over here for the day.
And if the family's also working a program of recovery and they're also in middle recovery, then they're going to be completely supportive of that choice that the addict's making, or making changes in the home to where everybody is comfortable in the same environment. So we always want to help the family members look at their own relationships to drug and alcohol, because they have their own relationships, and start taking a look at themselves, rather than just, you know, thinking, well, he's the problem, she's the problem, we don't have to change.
Correct.
So we really want to involve them.
And a lot of them don't want to change, you know. It's like, it's their problem. Why do I have to give up my wine?
Right, exactly.
You know, if you were allergic, if your loved one was allergic to peanut butter, would you bring peanut butter in the house?
Spread it all over the place, right.
Would you do that?
That's a great analogy.
Because it's the same consequences.
Yes.
They're dire consequences.
It would be so much easier to give up peanut butter, because peanut butter doesn't alter you.
Correct.
Yeah. So it really does speak volumes when families are, you know, insisting on having alcohol in their homes for the holidays. A lot of them will say, well, it's tradition. Well, that's fine.
Break your tradition.
Yeah, exactly.
Make a new one.
There you go.
Start a new one.
Right. Yeah. So these are some of the issues we come up against. So we have to support the addicted individual to separate out, to recognize what's a toxic environment. If the family's not supportive in that way, they may be well-intentioned, but they may not know how to help. So if they're not going to be in their own recovery and get educated, then the addicted individual may need to separate out a bit more.
Yes.
So that they're not triggered in that environment.
But what does a family look like in middle recovery then also? That they're just saying, okay, this isn't good for you. Okay, then we're going to change it for the whole family.
Well, the family in middle recovery, first of all, has gone through the similar stages of first coming out of denial, which, you know, we just talked about a family in denial. So a family coming out of denial will be willing to make those types of changes. A family coming out of denial will also stabilize in a new system, because they're going to be getting educated, they're going to be working either in therapy or coaching or some format, or 12-step meetings or smart recovery, to realize what needs to change. And what needs to change is healthier communication, no more blaming, no more shaming. That is going to be a more welcoming environment when everybody's practicing these new ways of communicating. So if they're in recovery, they are going to remove, you know, drugs and alcohol from the home.
Have a lockbox for prescriptions.
They could do that as well, of course, sure. And redevelop family traditions that aren't based in probably what was chaos before.
Correct.
Because when addiction was, you know, part of the system, it was chaotic. Usually it was. So we're going to see a greater stabilization within the family system too in middle recovery. So they can be working hand in hand in a parallel process. And then the addicted individual will feel much more comfortable going home. And everybody's celebrating their sobriety.
Yes,
you know?
Absolutely. And that is something to celebrate.
It sure is.
It's not a life sentence.
Right.
And there's so many people that look at it as a life sentence. You know, and it's really, if you're thinking that by never being able to have a drink again is a life sentence, then you're in abstinence and not in recovery.
Correct.
Because recovery allows you to live a life that you never pictured yourself living.
Right, because it involves change and positive change and all these tasks that we're talking about. You know, some of them are intellectual, some of the tasks, meaning you need to change your thinking. You have to be educated to change your thinking. And it's the family's job to get educated, let's face it, and the clients. So intellectual tasks, emotional tasks are more about accepting that this is the new reality and these are the changes that need to take place, and that they're positive changes.
Yes.
So that's more of an emotional task. And then the physical are, you know, actually doing things differently, changing tradition.
Yeah.
Getting the alcohol out of, changing, you know, if the addicted individual's coming home, rearranging their room, changing the old habits, creating new family norms, new sober norms, you know, social norms. So there's intellectual, emotional, and actual physical changes that we need to make. That's how change happens. It doesn't just happen because we want it to.
Correct. It doesn't happen.
So we have to take these actual steps.
Give me an example of some intellectual changes.
Well, so
concrete that you would ask of a family and you would ask of an identified person.
Okay. So in early recovery, or all along the process, the intellectual changes that would take place is starting to understand. And again, so this is it's not necessarily the first step. We'll take the first step. My life became unmanageable. I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol. First step is an intellectual step, recognizing that this is not working for you. It's an intellectual process to recognize that what felt like a solution before is actually the problem.
That statement, right, that you said right now. People that use drugs and alcohol have a void.
Right.
And that when that substance hits their body, that void feels better for that moment in time.
Which is why it felt like a solution. It feels like a solution.
Correct.
Right.
And that's what I think people, that's why people will say, well, he chose to do that. It's a moral failing. You're not seeing the emptiness inside that, not seeing the brokenness inside someone.
Right. And so that's the intellectual part for the family member as well, is recognizing intellectually, at least at first, that their addicted loved one, it's not that they don't care.
Right.
It's not that they don't love you. No, it's that they're hurting and they're trying to feel better.
Yes.
And at some point that goes bad. It goes wrong, obviously. It doesn't work. I mean, nothing good comes out of addiction. So I would say all along, and you'll see when I come and do this educational work, it's a lot of it's this educational and understanding. It's like going to school. There's so much to learn.
Yes.
Right? But then there's the emotional piece. And what is the emotional piece? Well, the emotional piece is actually having the feelings connected to this knowledge. That, oh my gosh, I have to change my lifestyle. That's not working for me anymore. Who am I? Who am I as I come into recovery? Who am I really? Because I saw a very dark, and so did the family, as you said about your own son, a very dark aspect. And is that who I am? A lot of addicted individuals believe that's who they are. I did. I thought I was a bad person.
Yes. You're not a bad person trying to become good.
Right.
You're a sick person trying to become well.
Sure. Right.
And that, to me, says everything. Well, you tested dirty. No, I didn't. I had a positive tox screen. I didn't have a dirty one. I'm not dirty trying to become clean. Just because I don't use drugs. I was never dirty.
Right. Well, how we use those words.
Those words are so convoluted towards the very soul of a person.
Sure. Well, that's true. Their shame and guilt and remorse is so deep, and it can keep them stuck. So we certainly don't want the family reinforcing that.
They're so embarrassed when they start to, and I saw it on my son.
Oh yeah.
The guilt and the shame that they carry.
They do.
And that they're worthless.
Yeah.
I
saw this 22-year-old struggling with it this morning, hearing from his own mother that she was robbing people for her crack addiction at one point in her life. And he was recognizing and really hating this part of himself, that he was also stealing and hurting the people he loved to support his own habit, and coming out of that darkness, because boy, there's no greater definition of darkness than addiction. There really isn't. It's a complete loss of control, and it brings out the very worst in people. So then there's a mourning process that goes along. There's a lot of grief, and if one doesn't let themselves feel that, I'm afraid they'll stay stuck.
Yeah.
I went through it. I see people going through it in rehab because they're not numbing. So in rehab settings, they're going to, their emotions are up. That's healthy.
Yes.
They need to be supported to have those feelings. So that's part of the emotional.
Yes, because a life event should not drive you to drugs and alcohol.
One life event?
Any life event, right?
No, and it's usually a series of life events that they need to unravel. When we really look back, it's really a series of life events that brought us to this place.
And when I speak to people in treatment, I always tell them, after the death of my son, I could have been prescribed any number of things.
I'll bet.
Any doctor would have given me Xanax, sleeping pills, whatever I asked for.
Yeah.
I could have drank and people would have excused me.
Sure.
Because of what I had to go through. But the point of the whole thing is I had to feel all of those feelings. And whether it was, if I numb myself for the first 5 years, at some point in time, I still have to sit through all that stuff.
Exactly. That's right.
You don't have to sit through it all at once.
That's right.
It comes in waves.
That's right.
And sometimes you just have to agree that I got to sit in this for now.
Yeah. And it is tolerable. See, one of the things
tolerable.
We don't think it is, and that's part of the problem. I tell clients this all the time. If you can learn how to tolerate your feelings, you can stay sober. Most people aren't willing to tolerate. They are so afraid of their feelings. They're afraid of the pain.
They're afraid of
the
because
anger.
we have a pill and a potion and a substance for everything that
and our society reinforces. You don't have to feel that. Okay, so there you go.
You know, when I sit at listen, it's not if you're going to have a problem, it's when you're going to have a problem.
That's right. And it's how you respond is really
and
the
how
key.
you respond to it. So if you have a roof over your head and food in your belly and a warm and safe place to sleep, well, everything I need has already been accomplished. And I'll get through this problem. And I'm going to wake up in the morning, God willing, right?
Right.
And I'll handle the rest of it tomorrow. We certainly don't need to fix the world's problems in 26 minutes. And being able to say, okay, we'll let this unfold a little bit more. I'm not sure what the answer is. And that's an answer.
Right, exactly. Yes. So resolving feelings of shame, guilt, and remorse is a huge step that I don't want to jump over, because to get to the later stages of recovery, if we don't, it's an ongoing process, by the way. As we resolve feelings of shame, guilt, and remorse, our self-esteem is increasing. We're feeling better about ourselves. And that prepares us for the later stages of recovery, which involves more work.
Yes.
And that work is the deeper work that I talk about. Some people will avoid. They never want to do family of origin work. They don't want to look at the deeply held belief systems that may keep them stuck and not allow them to attain the level of recovery that they really are entitled to and deserve, which are healthier relationships, wonderful self-esteem, and a satisfying life. So there is a place and a time to do that deeper work, and that's in late recovery. But you have to have all those previous stages built in. The support systems have to be there. We have to have a stronger sense of who we are.
Yes.
And then we can do a little bit deeper digging to say, now what's that family system that I came from that I said was so perfect? Maybe it's not.
I have to crawl before I walk and walk before I run.
Right. Exactly.
Or you will stumble and fall.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you take these things in the proper order and do these tasks, there is no reason to relapse. There really isn't. That's the beautiful part of this process, and you'll see when we do it with the folks.
Yeah, because I love that you say relapse doesn't have to be a part of the disease.
It doesn't. And that's why I like to put the emphasis. I'll go over the stages of relapse to help people recognize them within themselves in case they start to
because it's
move
not
in the wrong
an
direction.
Instant that you were just in a place that someone said, here, inject this, take this. That's not, it is really unrealistic. Many things brought you to get to that place.
Well, to where you could allow, right. So
where you could allow that place to happen.
A lot of people don't understand that if they're in an addiction cycle, they may stop for a month or two, but they're not really doing anything. They're just proving to themselves, they detox
that I could stop.
That I can stop. But they're still in an addiction cycle. If you really look at it, they didn't do any work. That's when relapse can feel like an event, because then when an environmental cue happens, you have nothing in place to help you resist. So it's going to occur. But when you're doing work in recovery and an environmental cue occurs, you're prepared. You've built in all these strategies. Yeah.
You did your tough work.
Right.
And unbelievably, we are out of time for today. Anyone that is really interested in doing the relapse prevention workshop, please get in touch with us. We have some spots available, and if not, we'll put you on a waiting list for the next workshops. It's a series of 8 weeks.
Yes.
I want you to have a great weekend, enjoy the fall foliage, and thanks for joining us. Take care.